There, exactly. So let me explain to you why I said what I did and what was going on, because that is a very typical encounter that you might find. Because what I have found is that employers who don't know what their rights are, they do one of two things. They either say, oh, you're from OSHA, get out of here, go away, get off my job site. Okay, frankly, I can live with that one. That one's I can deal with that because no harm done. A little harm done, but not much. The other one that is more typical in 90% of the cases is somebody says, oh, you're here from OSHA, and they either operate out of fear or ignorance. And I don't mean ignorance to insult anyone, but you just don't know the law. You don't know what your rights are. They say, oh, you're from OSHA, come on in. Sure, you can go walk around the job site. Take our scenario. Yeah, I'm going to call my safety guy. Meanwhile, why don't you go around there, talk around to some people and, take notes, take pictures, and I'll get right. That's the wrong way to handle that situation, Scott. And here's why. OSHA can only be on a job site and conduct an inspection if for one of two reasons. Either they have a warrant, which they almost never go get in advance, or they have your permission. Now, there's some very small exceptions to that, which is going to be where there's an inherent danger facing employees and it's observed from, off your job site, but that rarely happens too. So the most part, you're looking at consent. And the consent to that inspection needs to be an informed consent. And consent with OSHA doing an inspection doesn't mean OSHA gets to decide everything it's going to do. It's a negotiation. It's a discussion that an employer can do. It can be broken down into four things. I'm going to give you those four because they're not difficult. Simple, but not easy, as they say, but they are something that's simple to understand. So here they are, and I'm going to give you one word for each of them. Number one is a rule. So for fall protection or trenching or any of the major hazards you face on a construction site, what is your rule or process or procedure governing that hazard? So number one, rule. Number two is training. How do you effectively communicate that rule to employees? And that's almost always through a training program of some kind. So how do you train in the rules? So number one, rule. Number two, train. Number three is compliance. How do you know that workers on the job site are actually following one and two? How do you know they're following the rule and staying consistent with the training they've been given? And that's usually through walkarounds and job hazard analyses and other programs that encourage employees to come forth and raise safety issues for you to address and fix. And number four is enforcement. And that really is, what do you do when you catch, if number three is catching people doing it right or ensuring they're doing it right, number four is, well, what do you do when they don't do what's right, when they don't follow the rule and they break the rule and they put themselves or others in harm's way? And that's usually your progressive disciplinary policy.
Welcome, everybody. You are now watching and listening to the next episode of the Construction MF'ers. My name is Scott Peper. I am the CEO and founder of Mobilization Funding. And today we are going to bring you an expert on employment law and OSHA standards. What I'm hoping you grasp out of this is exactly what I did, which is knowing exactly what rules and regulations OSHA is in control over, what they are able to do if they ever roll up on your construction site, but more importantly, what rights you have and the things you can do. And I'm bringing to you today Phillip Russell. He is a board certified attorney in OSHA and employment law, and he is a renowned expert in this field, and he's going to give us all the information we need to know. Phillip, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Scott. Happy to be here. Glad to join you and your guests today. I'll do what I can to try and provide some helpful and maybe surprising information.
I think so. And, I wanted to let people know, and I don't normally read off the bio, but your specialty and focus is so critical that I just wanted people to know, as a board certified OSHA and employment lawyer, litigator, and advisor, you are a strategic, practical, and trusted partner to clients on labor and employment law matters. And one of your strengths is developing teams and deploying resources to ensure clients receive the best service and results. Now, that's a cool paragraph, but let me tell you why I think it's cool. When it comes to OSHA, there's a fear and a scaredness to that term, like OSHA's here. I mean, people would panic. OSHA's here at the front. They're asking questions. Boom, what do I do? And that fear can lead to real problems. And I think having an attorney and an expert explain from the contracting side, subcontractor, general contractor, project manager, engineer, wondering what they're armed and equipped to do in that setting, I think they're going to learn some pretty interesting things from you today on what they actually have the right to do without being in trouble.
Yeah, I'll add to that, Scott. I mean, I've handled in my career, I've been, blessed with a really amazing career for almost 30 years. And the last 15 is when I really started focusing more on OSHA, and especially in the construction industry. And in that industry and manufacturing some too, but mostly construction. And I've handled over 200 fatality cases and hundreds of other kinds. So when I handle a case, I'm not sitting in my office. I've got boots and jeans on. I'm on the job site, and so I've spent a lot of time with family and even friends, that work with the workers that may have lost their lives. So, my experience is not sitting in an office reading books and advising clients. It's getting in the field and working with these men and women, working their way through tragedy. But you are right. I mean, it's been a surprising journey for me to find out how many employers out there, safety professionals even, just have have some myths that they've been operating under for decades about what really OSHA can and can't do and what their rights are as employers.
Yeah. So let me give you a scenario and get right into it. I'm going to be OSHA and you happen to be with the client. Perfect circumstance would be you're standing next to your client when OSHA rolls up, but that probably never happens, right?
Well, let me interject. It happens virtually because 3 times today, somebody's, clients call me and said, OSHA's standing right here. And, I'm available. As I tell clients, my hotline, my bat phone is my text messaging. So you shoot me a text. I don't care what time of day it is. If OSHA's there, we're talking. So go ahead.
All right. So I'm OSHA. We're going to your typical construction site. There's people all over, subcontractors, general contractor, suppliers, equipment provider, all of them, everybody's there. It's a full active construction site. I'm OSHA. I walk into the trailer, I announce myself, and I tell them I'm going to go out and walk the site and I want to talk to who's in charge. What do I do?
Here's
what do I
exactly
do? Not what do I do, but what do you do as the
Right.
contractor?
So I'll put myself in the shoes. Here's what I'm going to do for you, Scott. I'm going to put my shoes, not in my own shoes as a lawyer. I'm going to put myself in the shoes of that job site superintendent or project manager.
Perfect.
And I'm going to say, hey, welcome. Happy you guys are here. We have a long history of taking safety seriously and making it a priority, and we respect and appreciate the job you do. Thank you for serving. I'm going to ask you to come over here to the conference room, have a seat. I can get you a cup of coffee, get you a bottle of water. But I need to call my safety team because we've got a protocol that we follow, and we need to do an opening conference with you. We need to discuss the scope of the inspection, the reason for the inspection, what it is you're looking to accomplish, and how we can help. But I got to follow my protocol. So if you'll just have a seat, I'll be right back with you in a few minutes.
Well, Phil, my protocol is while you're doing that, getting all your people together, my protocol is going to be I'm going to walk out to the site, ask some questions, do some looking around, get a little bit of lay of the land of the basic information while you're doing that. Cool?
No, that's not cool. We're going to ask you to sit right here because the walk around is going to require, our protocol for the walk around is we're going to need to agree on the scope first. And so I'm going to ask you to just wait right here. And then when we're ready, we'll come get you and walk around the job site together. But you're not going out there by yourself.
Oh, okay. I thought it was okay because on my way in, I talked to a couple guys and they said it's last time OSHA was here. Look, they thought maybe OSHA was here. It was cool for people to come walk around all the time that don't go by the trailer.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, that they said that to you, but what you should have done is what you ultimately did, which is to come in here and talk to us in the trailer. And again, happy to work with you, Scott, and make sure you get done what you need to today. But we're going to follow the protocol here and ask you to just wait. We'll get started in a few minutes.
Great. See, I think that's perfect because
yeah,
I haven't sat across from OSHA, but I've heard plenty of stories, and I've heard that OSHA can be, maybe they're aggressive, or maybe they're just, trying to get that approval by pushing a little, and I think like listening to you give that rapport was helpful. So what is the actual rights? What does the contractor's rights?
There, exactly. So let me explain to you why I said what I did and what was going on, because that is a very typical encounter that you might find. Because what I've found is that employers who don't know what their rights are, they do one of two things. They either say, oh, you're from OSHA, get out of here, go away, get off my job site. Okay, frankly, I can live with that one. That one's I can deal with that because no harm done. A little harm done, but not much. The other one that is more typical in 90% of the cases is somebody says, oh, you're here from OSHA, and they either operate out of fear or ignorance. And I don't mean ignorance to insult anyone, but you just don't know the law. you don't know what your rights are, they say, oh, you're from OSHA, come on in. Sure, you can go walk around the job site. Take our scenario. Yeah, I'm going to call my safety guy. Meanwhile, why don't you go around there, talk around to some people and, take notes, take pictures, and I'll get right. That's the wrong way to handle that situation, Scott. And here's why. OSHA can only be on a job site and conduct an inspection if for one of two reasons. Either they have a warrant, which they almost never go get in advance, or they have your permission. Now, there's some very small exceptions to that, which is going to be where there's an inherent danger facing employees and it's observed from, off your job site, but that rarely happens too. So the most part, you're looking at consent, and the consent to that inspection needs to be an informed consent. And consent with OSHA doing an inspection doesn't mean OSHA gets to decide everything it's going to do. It's a negotiation. It's a discussion. And another key component of what I was doing with that scenario and the role play there with you, Scott, is that OSHA's not law enforcement. Now, what I mean by that and how that's really critical for folks to understand, Scott, have you ever seen a crime drama?
Oh yeah, plenty.
Yeah. So what are the Miranda rights?
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say and do can be used against you in a court of law.
Right. So that's what's called the Miranda rights. It comes from a Supreme Court decision from several decades ago. And it essentially said that if law enforcement is going to have a custodial arrest, take your freedom away, put you in a jail cell, they have to tell you your rights before they do that. Well, OSHA is not law enforcement. So they don't have to tell you what your rights are and are not, or what they can and can't do. I've got a lot of friends that work at OSHA. I got a lot of friends that recently retired from OSHA. Last year at one of our safety symposiums with my firm, I had a panel of recently retired compliance officers, and we talked about this issue. And they love it when they show up to a job site where the employer's representatives on site, project managers, superintendents, don't know what they can and can't do. So they do whatever they will let them. And that was our scenario.
That's amazing. So what happens if so let's say you're the project superintendent, or higher, you're a project manager, you're on that site, and you find out that OSHA's walking the site with one of your employees. What is the best thing for you to do in that situation?
Go out and get them, ask them to come in the job site trailer, terminate it, stop the walk around. Okay. If it was somebody that's not management, and just say it was a laborer or a helper on the site, or maybe it was an operator or some kind, and said, sure, you can walk around. Well, that person doesn't have the authority to grant that to OSHA. Now, they are trained in that area. They do know that. That would be a very bold and foolish thing for an OSHA compliance officer to try and do that with permission of someone without management authority, or even low-level foreman, team lead, something like that, something that's kind of lower on the totem pole. That would be a foolish move for them, because a lot of that we could get thrown out as improperly obtained information and evidence. So most likely what you're going to find is they're going to come in and try and talk to somebody who can direct them to the job site trailer and somebody with overall authority over the site.
Gotcha. So what is OSHA looking to do when they come to a site? Do they just go to random sites? Are they out inspecting at a certain amount of time? Will OSHA inevitably come to a construction site no matter what? Like, is there a problem when they come? Or they kind of give everybody, maybe like put us in the shoes of OSHA. Why and when do they do what they do?
Sure. Well, wow, you just unpacked like 8 hours worth of answers there, but I'll keep it short.
Yeah, sorry.
So let's think about this from, I'll maybe take one of the questions there and we'll go back and hit a few more, but is it inevitable that at a construction site that OSHA would show up? And the answer is no. I've had clients even on mega projects that never see OSHA. But then I've also had smaller clients sometimes that they see OSHA all the time. So there's many ways in which OSHA may decide that they're going to focus on a particular employer. One is whether or not they fit into one of OSHA's national emphasis programs. And in construction right now, there are several that are generally applicable in the industry. Fall protection is one, trenching is one. Those are two big hazards on construction sites. But also silica is one that you see. So there's what they call them NEPs, or national emphasis programs. But usually I will tell you that more often than not, OSHA is going to be on the job site through what's called an unprogrammed inspection, which means it's not according to an NEP or some sort of random, selection off a list. It's because somebody complained. That means an employee called OSHA and said, hey, we have an unsafe trench here that we're being told to work in or around. Or, and we can talk about this on another question, is the employer had a mandatory reporting circumstance. And that comes up when you have a fatality or an inpatient hospitalization, amputation, or a loss of an eye. Those are the 4 categories. So I can dive deeper on any of those subjects, but those generally how OSHA would get to where you are and do an inspection.
So when you're working with clients, do you help recommend how they should teach and train for OSHA internally? Is that like a program that should be handled with your team at what stage of them being hired, ongoing? And then maybe you can touch a little bit about, if you're a general contractor, do you try to teach and train to your site and subs too, like, outside your business, but yet on your site?
Yeah, let me take that in reverse order, because the general contractor to the subs, and then subs to each other, sort of that, top down and then left, right on your org chart there on a job site. Anytime there's a multiple employer job site, communication is key. And I represent GCs, I represent subcontractors, I do a lot of work in the road and bridge building industry, a lot of work in electrical contracting. So they see this problem all the time. The most important thing a GC should do is down the sort of downstream, is to make sure everyone knows what the protocol is if OSHA shows up. And what if subcontractors should do, if the GC hasn't done that, is to go upstream and say, hey, what are we going to do if OSHA shows up? We need to make sure our folks are properly trained on whatever the protocol is. There's this thing called OSHA has what's called a multi-employer citation policy. And even though it's called a policy, it really is the law of the land everywhere. And it dictates what kind of employers are on a job site. And the most important thing they can do is communicate with each other. So the training piece you asked about, yeah, Scott, the biggest thing is we do a lot of training. I mean, we're not, we obviously we're the boots and jeans team that if something, bad happened, we'll be there. And we get on site very quickly. But in the gap times, I'm going to do this a week from Monday with a national manufacturing client, and we're training their plant managers, because I find that to be a gap. I mean, safety pros go to training, they go to conferences, they come to our safety symposium where we talk about the law in this area. But there's a big gap from the safety team and the in-house legal team down to that plant manager or job site superintendent, plant project manager. They don't know what to do when OSHA shows up. And it happens all too often that they just let OSHA do anything OSHA wants and don't call the safety team until 3 days later. And now they call me and say, hey, pull a rabbit out of a hat. And I start using terms like, I can't unring a bell. So it's better to do that in advance. So I really like that training, Scott. I've got a program again that I rolled out. It is, I think, one of the most rewarding things I do is to help those non-safety, non-legal people know what to do when OSHA shows up.
Yeah, I agree with you. When you know, like the top 5 or 6 scenarios of that could happen, and it's kind of ignorant not to teach and train to them, because obviously if you only have to go through one of them once in a bad spot to realize, man, that would have been nice to train. I'd rather spend the hours investing, and I would have rather spent the hours fixing that. I would have rather on the front end invested those hours teaching and training to avoid that scenario. But let's say it happens, and if you've been in business long enough, people make mistakes, employees make mistakes, and it's part of the game. So someone's now let them on the site, they've paraded them around, and OSHA, has found something they don't like. Now you're in a situation where you don't have complete control of it on the front end. What is the best thing to do when you find that out? OSHA's now walked the site. You don't know if they saw something they don't like. You don't know if they didn't, but what do you do?
So the next step that happens after that walk around scenario, Scott, is that OSHA is going to want to talk to some folks. They're going to want to do some interviews. And that's where the true harm can be done. So I honestly, look, walk-arounds are walk-arounds. You take pictures, things are as they are. I get it. But where an employer really can hurt itself by not having those folks properly trained, and be comfortable saying no to OSHA. Because it's perfectly lawful to say the things I illustrated for you earlier, or to say my safety guy can't be here for a few hours. We're not going to start interviews until my rep can get here, is also perfectly legal. There is nothing that requires you to drop everything you're doing and to just completely give in to OSHA's demands on site. Doesn't mean you need to be rude. You can be professional and courteous and say no. And that's part of the training we do, is helping folks get comfortable. saying no to OSHA. But those interviews are so important, my friend, because that's where I see employers really hurt themselves, is they let OSHA interview employees without preparing them. Now, you may have heard that it is, and this is true, that OSHA has a right, or at least they claim they have a right, but there's a privacy concern here with OSHA interviewing non-management employees. And the statute says that OSHA can interview them in private. There's a bit of a dispute as to whether that right belongs to OSHA or belongs to the employee. We employer side lawyers think it belongs to the employee. OSHA asserts it belongs to them, but nonetheless, those interviews are risky because if those employees aren't well prepared, then they tend to use them as confessionals or an opportunity to complain about their employer and bring safety issues to OSHA's attention before they've had the chance to bring them to the employer's attention. Like I tell folks all the time, I mean, my clients, my employers, I mean, an employer can fix a safety issue within hours or days. If OSHA is going to make you fix something, it takes them weeks and months, if ever. So I want to encourage employees always to bring those complaints to their employer. They have a right to bring them up to OSHA, would never interfere with that right or suggest my clients ever do that. But you want to encourage them to bring it up first. In those interviews, they oftentimes, though, will, hey, I know you're here to look at trenching, Mr. OSHA guy, but let me tell you about the fall protection stuff going on. So you want to be able to manage through that, but also make sure that the employees know what their rights are, because those are all voluntary interviews. And OSHA sometimes can behave poorly, and you want to give those employees the courage to stand up and say, I'm not going to do or say what you're telling me to say because it's not true.
Yeah, it's funny. I had a mentor once said one of the most powerful things you can learn to do is say no. And he goes, the beauty of no is it's a complete sentence. And I'm listening to you describe how to handle the scenario. I'm thinking, no. No, again, you don't have to be rude. You don't have to be like, nope, I'm not going to do that. Or no, I'm not going to let you do that. No, I can't do that. No, I won't do that. And it's very powerful when you can figure that out. And I think learning that in life is great, but for sure, if you're an employer and you can teach this to your employees, or you're on a site, you're in charge of a site, you're a general contractor, subcontractor, making sure people know that worst case scenario, here's your training with OSHA. If you see them, just say no, I need my supervisor. Just say no, I got to get my safety coordinator. No, it's just no. And if you get nothing else, just drill that down. Then you can give yourself, the individual employee, and the business and the site a fighting chance by then getting someone like yourself in as an expert and get your site safety supervisor on there. Because you're right, people get nervous and they just talk and that's exactly what OSHA wants you to do.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And they know, and look, again, my friends at OSHA are, when they say these things, I mean, I always listen. I want to learn too. How do they do their job? And they're not trying to be mean to someone, but they've got jobs to do. They want to get them done quickly. They don't want to sit in a conference room and wait 2 or 3 hours or half day or come back tomorrow. They want to get their job done. And I respect that. I appreciate that. But that doesn't mean that we should put ourselves in legal jeopardy by doing things too quickly before we're prepared. It's not required and we shouldn't do it. But, I'll tell you, I mean, thinking this through, talking this through with you, I mean, Scott, it just is such a reminder to me that the importance of really understanding this and getting this knowledge down to those folks that are going to first encounter OSHA. And let me give you one more reason why it's so important. And it really comes from Doug Parker himself. Doug is the head of OSHA right now. His title is a mouthful. He's the Assistant Secretary of Labor for Occupational Safety and Health. It's a mouthful. Fills a business card. But Doug's a good guy. Doug's a good guy. I've known him a while. I mean, I'll tell you this. I mean, his view is different than mine. I mean, his former job was he headed up California OSHA. So, he's bringing California concepts, bringing them to Fed OSHA, which has been tough. But I get it. He's a true believer, and I appreciate his service and all he does. But one of the things he said recently at a conference, in a meeting I was in, is, the stats are going to be approximate. So it's about half of OSHA's compliance officers around the country that work for Fed OSHA, not the state plans, but Fed OSHA. About half of them have been on their job less than 2 years. And so there are a lot of OSHA compliance officers out there that may break the rules or run over your rights as an employer, not because they're trying to be mean, because they just aren't yet into the job. They just haven't. The training programs probably need a little bit of an upgrade at OSHA, but more than that, you just haven't been on the job for less than 2 years. How many people really are experts if you've only been on the job for 2 years?
Oh,
So
yeah,
you
or
have
at
to
a
be.
minimum.
Yeah, so you got to be very careful about some COSHAs out there. When I say COSHA, that's a compliance, safety, and health officer. It's the investigators for OSHA. But a lot of them don't know what they're doing, so they're not trying to be mean. They just don't really know. And I love working with those folks because I love helping educate them about what
Yeah.
they can and can't do.
Well, one of the things you said to me when we talked first time, you had talked about just safety programs and having safety protocols, and that's part of what you do. I think we'd be a little remiss. We've talked a lot about how to handle OSHA in a situation and being right and proper and professional and maybe a little coy. But the best way to protect yourself from OSHA is to have a great safety program. Don't have unsafe trenches. Make sure employees know to tie off. All the things that are out there. And you touched on that when we talked. I think let's talk a little bit about how you can help folks create those safety programs and training programs with their teams.
Well, let me tell you right now, the most important thing that an employer can do can be broken down into 4 things. And let me give you those 4 because they're not difficult. Simple, but not easy, as they say, but they are something that's simple to understand. So here they are, and I'm going to give you one word for each of them. Number 1 is a rule. So for fall protection or trenching or any of the major hazards you face on a construction site, what is your rule or process or procedure governing that hazard? So number 1, rule. Number 2 is training. How do you effectively communicate that rule to employees? And that's almost always through a training program of some kind. So how do you train in the rules? So number 1, rule. Number 2, train. Number 3 is compliance. How do you know that workers on the job site are actually following 1 and 2? How do you know they're following the rule and staying consistent with the training they've been given? And that's usually through walkarounds and job hazard analyses and other programs that encourage employees to come forth and raise safety issues for you to address and fix. And number 4 is enforcement. And that really is, what do you do when you catch, if number 3 is catching people doing it right or ensuring they're doing it right, number 4 is, well, what do you do when they don't do what's right, when they don't follow the rule and they break the rule and they put themselves or others in harm's way? And that's usually your progressive disciplinary policy. It's okay to coach somebody every now and then about wearing the seatbelt on that heavy construction equipment, but if you catch them doing it more than once or twice and the coaching's not working, it's time for somebody to get written up. Yeah. And ultimately, sometimes somebody might lose their job. Better to have that and take enforcement seriously. So there's your 4 things, Scott. And if employers do those 4 things, any safety pro will tell you that's all an employer can do. And I'm going to reveal to you a bit of a secret here, because what I just gave you are 4 ways, and they really could describe everything an employer could do to make sure you have a safe place to work. But what happens if tragedy still strikes? Because I've got plenty of employers and clients that have done all 4 of those, and they are models to the universe. They're the best ever in all 4. And somebody might still get into a trench or fall off a height and lose their life. Well, here's what I just gave you, is that all 4 of those things are everything an employer could do to prevent an accident. But they're also the elements of what's called the unavoidable employee misconduct defense. It is a legal way for an employer to say, we did everything we could do. And so we should not be, we have an affirmative defense to a violation. But you almost always never need to have that, because if you do those 4 things, you just are not likely to have injuries and accidents and tragedies like a fatality. But I will say, probably those 200 plus fatalities I've handled, around 10%, 15% of them result in no citation whatsoever, because my client did all 4 of those things before the accident ever occurred.
And I was going to ask you too, and I'm sure this is probably, of all the things we talked about today, I'm sure employers know best in this scenario, but maybe I'm wrong. When tragedy does strike and someone is seriously injured, what's the first thing after someone is taken care of and you've handled that new patient and they're now being taken care of? What's the first thing you need to do now that the person's in a safe place being cared for?
Well, so let's start with the clock, because there is a shot clock. It's very, very short for when you have to report certain things to OSHA. So let's go over that list because that's important for employers to know, and a lot of folks miss it. Number one is a fatality. You have to report to OSHA within 8 hours of the fatal incident. So it's not 8 hours if they're admitted. Now, if they're admitted to the hospital and they haven't passed away yet, then you're probably on the hospitalization, which is the second category. But if they pass away later, you have 8 hours after they pass to report. So number one is fatality. Number two is hospitalization, but only hospitalization for inpatient treatment. Observation's not enough. It's not as clear as you may think it is, Scott, on hospitalization. So I do get a lot of calls from clients on that one. Why are they hospitalized? Was it work related? Was there some other indication of that caused the incident or the illness? Number three is amputation. Amputations also are not always entirely clear. There's the question for years about, well, how much has to be cut off? Is it a finger or is it an arm? Is it a hand? And so I will tell you, I'm going to share with you, it might be a little bit graphic here, but I'll share with you, I have a new rule that I started a couple of years ago when I had a landscaping client send me a picture and said, hey, I don't know if this is an amputation that we have to report within 24 hours or not, but here's a picture of the guy's finger. And you could see the side view picture showed a cut, a laceration, well, not an amputation. Then you can see the next picture from a different angle, still looks like a cut. Third picture, however, had something in a Ziploc bag. So, new rule, if you need a Ziploc bag, it's an amputation. So, so there. Now you got 24 hours after the amputation to call OSHA. And number four, by the way, just to finish off a little bit of the tongue-in-cheek humor here, number four is loss of an eyeball. I have no idea why loss of an eyeball 6 or 7 years ago merited its own category. Apparently that was the thing. But, and when would you not be going to the hospital if you lost your eyeball? So, but apparently, right, OSHA said we're going to make it its own category. So those are the occasions, and your shot clock is 8 hours for fatality, 24 hours for the others. But if you don't call OSHA or report to OSHA in a timely manner, and you can either do a call or do it online, then you can be cited for failure to report in a timely manner. But sometimes it's worth a risk, because if you're not entirely sure, and my rule is this, and I'll finish this, but it's very important info, Scott, is that don't call OSHA unless you have to. I used to have the rule of, well, if it's in a gray area or if we're not really sure, we will, out of an abundance of caution. Scott, you ever hear a lawyer say that? Out of an abundance of caution, right? That's lawyer language.
Plenty of times.
Yeah. Well, it means that I don't know the answer, but I'm going to tell you the safest thing so I don't get in trouble. So I have a new rule. Another new rule of mine is I don't use those words anymore, nor to anybody in my team, because I want it to be clear, because that's the law. The law says it's OSHA's burden to prove that I should have reported. So I'm looking for evidence that it's work related and fits one of these categories before I'm calling the government. I'm not doing it because I don't know the answer. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. That's a great tidbit, man. And I think about that tragedy where someone falls in a trench and passes away, and it's accidental. And then you see unsafe trenches all the time that someone's in, and you're like, man, that's the reason why OSHA's there, so like that there is real reasons to have regulations. And so the teaching and training, I think, should just be such a great focus. You breaking it down into those 4 bullet points and easy protocols for handling these scenarios, I think is just so critical and helpful. Now, how can someone get in touch with you, and what types of services can they reach out to you for, other than just they've had a disaster and they need a lawyer? That's obvious. Let's just say, though, they want to have some expertise and safety and training, and you've mentioned that. And just because you're a lawyer doesn't mean you have to only call you when you need a lawyer.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm not hard to find. I mean, I'm in the professional service business, right? So if you type in Phillip Russell, and my firm is Ogletree Deakins, you'll find me. I also do a podcast like you, so thanks for having me today. But the podcast I do is called Dirty Steel Toe Boots, and it's all things OSHA. A lot of the listeners are in-house lawyers with responsibilities over OSHA matters, but also safety pros. And it's on the Ogletree podcast platform, which is available, I think, on all the other ones, whatever the platforms are that go out there. I also post at least 2 or 3 days a week on LinkedIn, Scott, and I've done this for a while. I did it actually. There was 1 year in which OSHA was trying to push through the emergency temporary standard on COVID. And I posted every single day for a year. And gosh, there were times I was getting 35, 40,000 views. So Really great platform for me to go to and share breaking news and developments. Last week, I posted a discussion on hard hats versus helmets. I think it's at 15,000 views. So I think I've just really found a good audience out there that I enjoy interacting and engaging with on all things OSHA. So check me out on LinkedIn, check me out on the podcast, find me at Ogletree. I heard that I'm the guy that nobody ever wants to meet, so I get that. I mean, usually if somebody's calling me, it's because something bad happened. So I try to provide as much as I can for services and help and education for when when tragedy hasn't struck.
Well, I agree with you, man. I think the information you're putting out, your willingness to share it freely, is really reassuring, and I think just really kind of you, honestly. And obviously getting that information and being able to see it and learn it. You mentioned some regulations and posting them out. One of the questions I wanted to ask you before we hung up today, before we were done with our conversation, is, are there any new rules or things that just came out on OSHA or not incentives, but like things that they're focusing on that people should know that they might not otherwise?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's a lot. Last year was probably one of the most aggressive years we've ever seen in terms of the regulation pipeline. What we're waiting on right now, well, let me just say one thing that just happened as of January 1 of this year is OSHA is now requiring the online submission of your log data for most construction companies, most larger ones. I mean, smaller mom and pops, not so much. But if you're 100 or over, you got some obligations there that are in place right now. The next thing we're expecting to see is the finalization of what's called the walk-around rule. And this is something where OSHA is, I think, exceeding its legal authority to try and force union organizers onto non-unionized job sites through the walk-around phase. And that probably requires a whole different podcast discussion to explain it, but let me be very simple on it. OSHA, there is a part of the OSHA Act, that's the Occupational Safety and Health Act, that created OSHA. And it says that an employee's authorized representative can accompany OSHA on the walk-around. Well, there's no dispute if there's a union in place at the job site that's been formed properly through the National Labor Relations Act, because there's a law that governs that. But if there's no union, OSHA's taken the position in this new proposed reg that this new standard that OSHA can decide who the authorized representative is, and as long as that person is reasonably necessary, they can walk around. Well, that's going to open up the door to all sorts of shenanigans and folks on the job site that shouldn't be there, that have no right to be there. And legally, they're not the legally authorized representative under the National Labor Relations Act. So I think there's all sort of legal reasons why that's a bad idea, not legally sustainable. I think it'll likely get stopped in court once the final rule is issued. And a final note, and again, hot topic here, pardon the pun, but it's heat illness. It is a big deal to OSHA. They have been going through a rulemaking process now for over the last 18 months. Doug Parker implemented a lot of these new requirements in California. It's important to him personally. I've heard him speak about it. We don't have a final rule yet. We don't even have a proposed rule yet. So we haven't had a chance to go through extensive commentary on what the final rule looks like, although OSHA has done what's called advanced notice of proposed rulemaking to get input from the regulated industry. I've been involved in a lot of those comments for a lot of industry groups. We don't know when OSHA is going to issue the proposed rule. I expect maybe second quarter is the most likely, but it could really happen any day now. We'll find out soon enough. But OSHA is essentially wanting to govern what employers do and don't do when it comes to heat exposure in the workplace. And that's a big deal to look out for.
Yeah, I wouldn't even thought of that, actually. Now that there's definitely that could definitely be a concern, especially on a construction site in certain climates.
Well, I mean, OSHA issued, in April of 2022, issued a national emphasis program. Remember, I mentioned those earlier, on heat. And, one of the things that was frustrating to employers is one of the trigger temperatures for OSHA doing inspections on heat in the workplace was 80 degrees on the heat index. Okay. In Florida, which is where we sit, how many days of the year are, when you combine air temperature and humidity on the heat index, how many are above 80? What, 362? I mean, come on. I mean, what winter this year is already come and gone, right? It was a week. So, it's just, there's some unrealistic expectations, I think. I mean, ultimately, look, I don't know I think if you want to avoid OSHA, whether it's under the general duty clause requirements, which I know we didn't talk about much, but that's when OSHA tries to cite you and they don't have a specific standard, or if they have a specific standard. If you want to avoid trouble with OSHA, do something about heat. That's water, rest, shade, breaks. Those are all things an employer can consider. Nobody disagrees with the fact that heat is a recognized hazard that ought to be dealt with. And most employers, in my experience, already do a lot. So my hope is that if OSHA issues a standard, it's what we call a performance standard, which allows the employer some discretion as to what they're going to do that's appropriate for the job site and allows them to appropriately consider a person's condition, the job workload, their history, and capabilities. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does. I got one last question for you. Maybe
Sure.
two. How many contractors or construction folks out there do you think are adequately prepared for OSHA or at risk if OSHA were to show up? Is there
Oh,
a
man. Yeah, I mean, I have been so surprised over the last few years, Scott. I have no survey to give you or any data, so I'll go anecdotally, but I'm going to go anecdotally back over my LinkedIn experience. When I first started doing this about 3 years ago, I went from having about 1,000 followers to over 10,000 or around that mark. Mostly are safety pros or in-house lawyers. And it's just through all these postings, all these discussions, the comments I get back, and also I go to conferences and conventions all the time. I mean, this year I'll speak to probably 6 or 7 different conferences or conventions, mostly in construction, but a couple that are outside the industry. And I'm always surprised at the myths that folks have bought into. Like, the myth that OSHA can shut down a job site. No, they can't. The myth that you have to have workers working when OSHA does a walk around. No, you don't. The myth that, you have to do whatever OSHA wants you to do and there's no negotiating. No, that's not true either. I mean, and on and on. And some of the things I've talked about today. So I think there are more employers that are not well prepared than there are those that are well prepared. I just don't know where to put the line, but I would think it's probably a substantial majority of those are not prepared for when OSHA shows up.
Yeah, that's exactly why I wanted to have you on. That would be my anecdotal experience or answer as well. And the reason I wanted to have you on today is because I think in 25, 30 short minutes here, someone can get, around the bases enough to think and understand whether or not they're adequately prepared or they need to do something about it. And thank you.
Well, you're welcome, but let me tell you why I do this job. I mean, or how I do it the way I do it. And that is that, I lost my mother in a workplace accident. And it was, without getting too much family history here, we weren't close, but she had not yet met my daughter, and I wanted that to happen. And we were just a few months away from that happening when she lost her life in a workplace accident. And so it didn't prompt me to be an OSHA lawyer. There's a different story there, but it does impact how I do this job. And so for me, this is not about minimizing liability. This is not about avoiding your responsibility. This is about helping employers have a safer place to work. Because you asked a question earlier I didn't fully answer, and that was, what do you do once something bad has happened? And I talked about reporting to OSHA, which is the immediate legal requirement you got to consider. But right after that, once we've taken care of that, the question that I ask my clients sitting in that conference room in that job site trailer is, what do we do to make sure this doesn't happen again? And that's the focus, not what is it going to take to avoid or minimize a citation. That's my job. I'll lead you through that. I'll guide you through that. But right now, guys, looking around the room at you, what are we going to do to make sure that we no longer have any more unprotected, heights or trenches that weren't dug or sloped properly or protected? What are we going to do to make sure this never happens again? I was preparing this morning, Scott, with a client of mine that implemented 18 separate bullet point items after an accident occurred, a fatal accident, that are all these abatement items that they were doing. And the thing is, the underlying citation that was issued against them is not going to stand. It's a terrible citation item. I'm fairly confident we're going to get rid of it. But what impressed me so much about this client I've represented for a long time is that they didn't care. I mean, the OSHA thing's important, sure. But what was most important is learning from the incident, seeing that, well, we didn't violate a standard here. We're confident in that, but maybe there's more we could do. That's the client I'm looking for. That's the client I like to work with, is those folks that take it seriously. And I'll finish on this note. I basically do the same thing OSHA does. And I say this to my friends at OSHA all the time. We have the same job. We just have different roles. The job is safety. The job is helping more men and women go home with all their body parts and healthy and happy and having a productive, work life and safe work life. It is about holding OSHA accountable to the law. It's not about fighting OSHA, battling OSHA, or beating anybody up. That's what I do. And as you can tell, I kind of love talking about what I do. So
Yeah, no, I
thanks
think
for
that's
having me
awesome.
on.
And the fact that you have a personal connection to it is what makes you great at it, man, and care about it, especially in an area where people might think, how do you find passion in something like that? I mean, anyone can find passion in human life and safety and saving lives, but I don't think people would have tied it to being a lawyer focused on OSHA. And the way you've done that is what makes you special.
Wow, man, I appreciate it very much. It's a kind thing to say, but
Yeah.
I will say this, I will put that onto my clients because I have been very blessed to have, over the years, hundreds of clients who, fit my style and appreciate and understand what I'm trying to do. And that's the kind of fit I'm looking for, is folks that, that clients are, really take it seriously and they want the same thing I want, which is to have a safe place to work for everybody.
Well, I'm glad that I made that connection because I could sense that in you. I didn't know what it was. I just knew you were interesting in a topic that might be very boring to talk about, but I found it interesting when we talked before. This has been one of the easiest conversations I've had. And to find out at the end why now I understand is really cool. So I think that's awesome. And I'm glad you shared that. And I appreciate you doing it because it's real. You can see it in you again. And it's not because you found this cool, creative way to make safety cool. You could just tell that there's a feeling there that you care and a purpose behind it. And it's not to like find a way to beat OSHA. It's find a way to be safe, to prevent death, but also know who your rights are. And knowing why is cool, man. So I appreciate you sharing that a lot. And I'm sorry for the loss of your mom.
Oh, I appreciate that. And again, I don't want to overplay that because I mean sometimes people bring in their personal drama and trump it up a little bit. That's not what I'm doing, but it does, I do think about it, and I can't tell you how many times I've been in that conference room or that job site trailer, and and sometimes I'll pray with those folks if they're comfortable and want to do that sort of thing. I'm a praying man, and in that time I think it's important. And so, I've shared some tough moments with some men and women who've just lost their best friend that were up, and then they got to go get on that same backhoe tomorrow.
Yeah.
I've also had probably about a dozen cases where there was a family member that died. So, a father or a grandfather who, killed his grandson accidentally, and brother, I mean, father to son, I mean, you name it. I've had, all the family relationships. I mean, so those are tough.
Well, remember, man, God equips us with things that we can handle. And some of the things we're best at handling are the challenges and struggles that we went through. And so it's those challenges and struggles we go through is what equips us to be the best person for the job in that scenario. And so I'm grateful for you, man. Thank you for bringing that to light and sharing that because like I said, I could tell there's something else there. I didn't know what it was. I wasn't going to be, hey, what is it? But I could tell something made it more genuine. And I think that's what makes it real. And that's probably why you have a good following as well. And people are resonating with you. So I'm excited for people to be able to listen to this. And I know they're going to be able to implement some things. And I'm really grateful you gave me the time and joined us and shared your knowledge and experience. And I'm sure people are going to be able to grab some nuggets off of this, implement them back in to make their companies, teams, and more safe and of course better. And so just a reminder again, I will put all of your information in the show notes, but how do people find you? What's the best, easiest way? On LinkedIn at Phillip Russell, Ogletree Deakins, anywhere else? In the podcast.
That's pretty much it. Yep,
Yeah,
pretty
and
easy
your
to
podcast,
find.
Dirt, Steel,
And the
Toe
podcast.
Boots.
Yep, that's it. Scott, I appreciate you very much, buddy. I appreciate the platform and the opportunity, and hope I can help people learn a little more and make a difference.
Absolutely, man. And I'm glad to be able to refer our clients over to you and the people in our network too, because before meeting you a short time ago, I would have not had it. Anyone I said, call your lawyer. I wouldn't have known. So I'm glad. And it's cool. A great service. And, again, I really appreciate you coming on today.
All right. You got it, Scott. Thank you, pal.
Thank you. Everybody, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. If you did, please share it with your friends. Jump on LinkedIn and connect with both Phillip and I. Check out our YouTube channel where if you can watch this, you'll see this and other videos there. And of course, you can check out both of our podcasts on any one of the platforms click subscribe. Until next time, I wish you the best and God bless you all.